Are we closer to World War III than ever before? From politicians to pundits, the idea that we're on the brink of another global conflict has been floated more times than a conspiracy theory in a flat Earth convention. But are we really teetering on the edge of World War III? Or are we just overreacting like that one friend who insists on hoarding toilet paper at the slightest hint of a snowstorm? Stick around because the truth might surprise you. So why are we even talking about this? Well, it's not just a handful of doomsday preppers living off of canned beans and filtered rainwater. World leaders, yes, the folks who have the nuclear codes, are openly discussing the possibility of global conflict. This isn't some basement-dwelling conspiracy, it's being discussed at the highest levels of government. Take a look at the headlines from escalating tensions in Ukraine to the South China Sea, where territorial disputes are heating up like a kettle left on the stove. Add that to the growing concerns over Taiwan, Iran's nuclear ambitions, and the North Korea's occasional missile tests, you've got a global situation that feels more like a ticking time bomb than a peaceful coexistence. Before we dive into today's global chaos even more, let's take a trip back in time. What led us to World War I and II? And are there any patterns that might give us a clue about what's happening today? Keep watching because the historical lessons are more relevant than ever. History doesn't really repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So let's dig into the verses of the past. World War I, also known as the Great War, before we knew there'd be a sequel, didn't just happen overnight. It was the result of years of rising tensions, a complex web of alliances, and aggressive nationalism. Picture this, it's June 20th, 1914, and the young Siberian nationalist Gavrilo Principal takes aim and fires a shot that would echo around the world. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was the spark, but the room was already filled with gunpowder. Europe was a continent armed to the teeth, with nations bound by treaties that almost guaranteed a full-scale war once the first domino fell. The tangled alliances meant that when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia stepped in to defend Serbia. Then Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, declared a war on Germany, and so on. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed in one of the deadliest conflicts in history, driven with a combination of militarism, nationalism, and a catastrophic failure of diplomacy. Fast forward to 1939, and you've got World War II, a conflict born out of the unresolved issues of the First War, compounded by the Great Depression, and fueled by the rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan. Hitler's aggressive expansionism and the failure of appeasement policies led to a conflict that spanned the globe. It was a war of ideology as much as territory, with the Axis powers seeking to reshape the world order through force. So what can we learn from these two wars? Both world wars were triggered by a mix of aggressive nationalism, economic instability, and a failure of diplomacy. But what really stands out to me is how quickly things escalated from regional conflicts to global warfare. The question now is, are we seeing similar patterns today? Stick with me because the comparisons might be closer than you think. Now fast forward to 2024, the world looks different. Technology has advanced, economies are interconnected like never before, and we have international institutions like the United Nations. But the core dynamics of power, rivalry, and conflict, those haven't changed much. Today, we're living in a multipolar world. The US, Russia, and China are the big players, each with its own sphere of influence and a hefty military arsenal. But it's not just these superpowers we need to watch. Regional powers like India, Turkey, and Iran are also flexing their muscles. Let's break that down quickly. Eastern Europe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been dragging on with no end in sight. NATO is beefing up the presence in Eastern Europe, and the possibility of direct confrontation between NATO and Russia is not off the table. South China Sea, over in Asia, China's territorial ambitions are putting it at odds with its neighbors and with the United States. The US has made it clear that it will defend Taiwan if necessary. The South China Sea is becoming a flashpoint, with military exercises and skirmishes becoming increasingly common. The Middle East, the region remains a power keg with conflicts in Syria and the ongoing tension between Israel and Iran. Any one of these conflicts could spiral out of control, drawing in major powers. But it's not just about where our troops are, it's also about the money. Global military spending reached an all-time high of $2 trillion in 2023, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Nations aren't just preparing for war, they're actively investing in new technologies including cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and autonomous weapons. Yeah, the stakes are higher than ever before. And if that wasn't enough, we got the global economy teetering on the edge, with inflation, energy crises, and the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Historically, economic turmoil has often led to war, as governments look to distract from domestic issues with foreign adventures. So where does that leave us today? Let's take a closer look. So are we actually close to World War III? The answer is complicated. On one side, we have escalating tensions, military buildups, economic instability, and emerging technologies that could push us closer to the brink. The risks are real. For example, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists recently moved the doomsday clock to 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. That's a pretty ominous sign. But on the other hand, we have diplomatic efforts, international organizations, and frankly, the terrifying reality of nuclear weapons that make full-scale global war a less attractive option than ever before. Unlike in the 20th century, we have the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, and countless treaties designed to prevent war. And let's not forget the concept of mutually assured destruction, because nothing says, let's not do this quite like the prospect of total annihilation. And let's be honest, no one really wants to be remembered as the world leader who started World War III. That's the kind of legacy you can't shake off with a presidential library. While there's a lot of saber rattling going on, there's also a back channel of diplomacy, where the leaders try to work things out before it all goes kaboom. So while the risks are higher than they've ever been in decades, the mechanisms to prevent a global conflict are also stronger than ever. What's more likely is that we'll continue to see proxy wars, economic skirmishes, and a lot of tough talk on Twitter, but without crossing that ultimate line. And you might be wondering, how do we just avoid stumbling into World War III altogether? Now, it's going to take a little bit more than hoping everyone just chills out. First, diplomacy needs to ramp up big time. Nations need to keep talking even when they're not seeing eye to eye. History has shown us that when communication breaks down, things can spiral out of control fast. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was the direct communication between Kennedy and Khrushchev that ultimately prevented nuclear war. That kind of dialogue is more important now than ever. Next, we need to strengthen international institutions. The United Nations, despite its flaws, is one of the best tools we have to prevent conflict. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. We also need to push for more arms control agreements. And maybe we should all just take a collective deep breath and stop calling every international disagreement the next world war. It's like crying wolf, but instead of a wolf, it's thermonuclear devices. So are we on the brink of World War III? Probably not. Yet. But the risks are real and the stakes couldn't be higher. So let's all try to keep our heads cool and our leaders accountable, because while history might not rhyme, it doesn't have to end in a trilogy. And now you get to participate in the next trilogy, which is give this video a like, comment on your thoughts on this situation, and subscribe if you want more videos like this that keep you in the loop on what's going on.